The train screeched to a halt, throwing sparks into the cold December air. A heavy fog rolled across the station, blanketing the scene in eerie silence, except for the clatter of boots on the concrete platform. There she stood, clutching a worn leather suitcase with trembling fingers. Her dark curls framed a face etched with hesitation and heartache. Amelia's gaze flickered between the arriving passengers and the empty stretch of track ahead. She didn't know if he'd come. The ticket in her coat pocket burned against her chest, a one-way ride to anywhere but here. She wasn't sure if this was running away or moving on. What she was sure of, though, was that their fight last night had cut deeper than either of them expected. It had started innocently, like most of their arguments did. A playful jab about how Owen was always late when they went out, how he could never pick a place for dinner without changing his mind at least twice. He'd rolled his eyes and laughed it off, but then he brought up her tendency to overthink everything, to spiral into worry over the smallest things. "You're always in your own head, Amelia," he'd said, leaning against the kitchen counter. His tone was light, teasing, but it landed wrong. "You make everything so much harder than it has to be." "Maybe I wouldn't have to overthink everything if you actually thought once in a while," she'd snapped, slamming the cupboard shut. The silence that followed was deafening. His face darkened, and she could see the hurt flicker across his expression before he masked it with irritation. "Right, so I'm just the irresponsible guy who never thinks?" "Got it." "That's not what I meant." "No, I get it, Amelia. You've got it all figured out, don't you? You always do." His voice had risen, frustration bleeding into every word. The fight spiraled from there, words flying too fast, too sharp. She accused him of never taking their relationship seriously enough, of brushing things off until it was too late. He shot back that she was too controlling, too afraid to let things just be. By the time the storm settled, they were both standing on opposite ends of the room, breathing hard, staring at the floor. "Maybe we're just not meant to do this anymore," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own heartbeat. He looked up at her then, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You don't mean that." But she didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she turned and walked out of the room, the silence closing in behind her, like a door slamming shut. Now, standing on the platform, Amelia replayed the scene over and over in her mind. Every word, every mistake. She could still see the hurt in his eyes, the way his jaw had tightened as he tried to hold back whatever he'd wanted to say. He'd always been like that, holding his feelings close to his chest, like secrets he wasn't ready to share. She glanced down at her phone, the screen lighting up with a message from her sister. "Are you sure about this?" Amelia sighed, slipping the phone back into her pocket without replying. She wasn't sure about anything anymore. The train doors hissed open, and the conductor called out for passengers to board. She hesitated, her feet rooted to the ground. And then she heard it. "Amelia!" Her head snapped up, her heart leaping into her throat. There he was, weaving through the crowd with wild urgency, his hair a mess and his coat flapping behind him. Owen's face was flushed, his breath visible in the icy air. He looked like he'd run the whole way here. "Amelia, wait!" he called again, louder this time. Heads turned, but neither of them cared. She took a step back, her suitcase slipping from her hand. "What are you doing here?" She managed, her voice shaky. He stopped in front of her, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. "I couldn't let you go," he said, his voice raw. "Not like this." Her eyes stung, and she bit her lip to keep the tears at bay. "We said things last night, things we can't take back." "I know," he admitted, stepping closer. "But I don't care. I don't care how many fights we have or how many times we screw things up. I don't want to lose you, Amelia." Her heart ached at the sincerity in his voice. "Owen, we're a mess." "Yeah, we are," he said with a soft laugh, reaching for her hands. His touch was warm against the cold. "But I'd rather be a mess with you than have everything perfect with someone else." The train whistle blew, a sharp reminder of the decision hanging in the air. Amelia glanced at the open door, then back at Owen. His eyes searched hers, silently begging her to stay. For a moment, she stood frozen, caught between the past and the future. Then, slowly, she reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Me too," he said, pressing his forehead against hers. "But we'll figure it out. Together." The train doors began to close, and Amelia stepped back, letting them slide shut behind her. The sound of the engine faded into the distance as she turned to Owen, a small, hesitant smile breaking through the tears on her face. "I'm not going anywhere," she said softly. Owen grinned, pulling her into his arms. "Good," he murmured into her hair, "because I wasn't letting you go anyway." The fog began to lift as they stood there on the platform, wrapped in each other's arms. The world around them blurred, leaving only the